Hey, noble ones, always a pleasure. Hello from me, Metatron. Kinda want to show you the handle on this. Now, there are a lot of things that I really like about Norse culture and history. Obviously, I really like their armor, shields, hence I have a replica, the axes, the swords, the weapons, all of that kind of stuff. I love the saga, I love the literature, I love the language, Old Norse. But whenever you think about the Norse, and if I were to ask you what's the first thing that comes to mind, what would you say? The runes, maybe? Well, I think for a lot of people, they might say Berserkers. Berserkers as a type of warrior is such a fascinating topic that I thought, you know what, I don't think I have a dedicated video, so how about we talk a little bit about them. Well, there are quite a few things that we can say about berserkers, but first of all we need to discuss the difference between a mythical aspect of a berserker and what would have been instead a historical berserker. Often when we imagine the berserkers, we are thinking of these completely crazy warriors that go into this rage, some people say induced by substances, perhaps alcohol, perhaps mushrooms. Other people say no, they were just particularly violent and raging because of that, and maybe some people even connect it to Old Norse mythology, so the idea of it's the gods, specifically one god, we'll get that to a minute, that gives them this state. Berserkir. Anyways, savages, brutish, strong warriors that rage and run into battle. That's how we usually imagine them. Now, berserkers are absolutely mentioned in the sagas, in fact, in several sagas. Although it's important to note that the idea of berserkers consuming anything that would give them this altered state of mind, that is completely speculative, no mention whatsoever. Now, with that being said, what happens at a visual level when we write berserker, for example, on Google? We get quite a few things. The first thing I would like to address is this. Would a berserker have any connection, in fact, with bare skin? Well, to respond to this, we need to, of course, look at the etymology of the word. I'll give you a little bit of an overall idea here, but if you want to know more and you want to listen to an actual professional about it, do check the channel run by Dr. Jackson Crawford. The idea that berserkers would be wearing bare skin comes from one possible interpretation of the Old Norse word berserker, which is singular, berserkir, plural. Serker meaning shirt, ber meaning either bare in the sense of the animal or bare in the sense of naked. So, bare shirt or bare of shirt, so naked of shirt. Now, the correct interpretation is indeed debated. We don't know. To add my own personal input when it comes to this, even though I'm not trained in Old Norse, but I do have experience in translation, I would say it could very much be both. I personally think that it's a play on words. And it's done on purpose. How am I going to justify that? When we read the way these berserkers are described in the sources, we will find indicators to both interpretation as being suitable. In some passages we're told that the berserkers are in fact going to battle without wearing armor. In that case, bare of shirt would be a good interpretation. However, there is also another indicator that instead points to the idea of a connection between animal skin specifically, or animals, and the berserker, and that is the word Úlfhéðin. Here you see that I'm writing it Úlfhéðnar because that's the plural, Úlfhéðin singular. And this word here actually means wolf, so wolf shirt. And the thing is that when it comes to berserkers, sometimes they are indicated as Úlfhéðnar in the saga, depending on what you read. So it is possible that this is the exact same type of warrior. Returning for a moment to the berserkangr, so the altered state of mind, or this sort of warlike fury that takes over the mind of the berserkers. Having removed for a moment the hypothesis that sees a correlation between the ingestion of any sort of substance in order to induce it chemically into the body, and of course not discussing the mythological aspects of it, how could we explain the achieving of such a mental state by the berserkers, historically? Well, let's examine it. If we pay close attention to the way it's described, this is such a fury that it can only be contained by iron chains or expressed in combat. And the way this is achieved is by screaming, howling, roaring like animals, biting the rim of the shields, and sometimes even going as far as ingesting hot coal. By looking at this, I think the first causal link that we can find is that there is indeed some similitude to the sort of sometimes involuntary actions that are performed by people under stress, specifically soldiers, before a battle. Now this can go from voluntary ones, such as screaming, yelling at your opponent, smashing your weapons against your shields to create noise, all actions that occur in order to exercise your fear and, in a way, cause fear on your opponent, puffing your chest, all the way down to the subliminal ones, the subconscious. And the ancients do tell us about this, both when it comes to the Greek soldiers, for example, before a battle. Let me tell you about these. Tertius writes about men who bite their lips and rub the heels of their feet to try and release their fear. Xenophon and Plutarch describe in details the terror that possesses the soldiers right before battle. These non-verbal cues are highly indicative of the Greek soldier's mental state here. Actions such as fidgeting, engaging in lip compression movements are all signs of self-soothing behavior due to a markedly heightened anxious state or stress. In other words, the so-called fight-or-flight response, which can lead to involuntary movements and dryness of the mouth. The heel rubbing is also a form of anxiety display due to the huge cognitive load the individuals were under. And in this case, body language speaks more than words, because words can be controlled, articulated, and crafted. So the way I would really describe in the most realistic way what this berserkangr would be is a more pronounced, in fact, extreme version of all these forms of rituals, subliminal and intentional, that many times warriors have performed before the moment of lethal combat. But brought to such an extreme, the people tell us about it, and it even gave a name to these warriors. Imagine, for instance, the haka of the Maori warriors, the riastrad or deformation typical of Celtic warriors in Ireland, the so-called furor of the Gallic warriors as explained by the Romans. Another question that we could have is, how far back in time does the concept, the tradition, the cultural idea of a berserker go? Is it proper of the Viking age, or is it more ancient? I think the evidence points quite strongly to the idea that berserkers would have been definitely more ancient and predated the Viking period. One piece of iconography that we can discuss when it comes to this are the so-called golden horns of Gallius, made of gold in sheet, discovered in Denmark, belonging to AD 5th century. So we are in the Germanic Iron Age. If we look at the symbols and depictions on the horns, among other things, we will find two warriors who are clearly naked, but are wearing some sort of animal head. Possibly a wolf, maybe. Now, would this be berserkers? Is this a representation of an early type of berserkers? We can't know for sure. Also because on the same horns, we find mythological creatures that clearly belong to the Mediterranean world, such as centaurs and the tricephalous giant. However, we do find more precise and more easily identifiable iconography in two famous elements or archaeological digs. The Gutenstein scabbard, late 7th century, which clearly shows warriors that appear to be berserkers once again, with wolf heads and even tails. And worth of note, the fact that this scabbard was actually found in Germany. Last but not least, the Torslunda plates, made of bronze, belonging to the 6th to 8th century AD. Once again, wolf warriors. And what's fascinating about this is not only that we have got wolf-headed warriors that could well be berserkers in a continental Germanic context, but that they are represented or depicted near an image or a personage that has been interpreted being Odin. Having discussed all of this iconography, we could clearly see that there is overwhelming evidence that appears to point to the idea of a wolf-headed warrior, or a warrior wearing a wolf skin as opposed to a bear skin. With that being said, we do have an exception to this, which is the depiction on the runic stone number 56 of Kalbi, which represents instead what appears to be a warrior with the head of a bear. And Snorri, as a writer, does mention that the berserk state of mind made berserkers as strong as bears. Now, is it possible to postulate the idea that there would be a presence of something very similar to a berserker that we have in the Norse culture, but in other Germanic cultures, for instance, of continental Europe? While I believe that something similar could have absolutely happened, it is also important to be careful not to confuse mythological ideas and irrelevant statements, even if present in the sources, with berserkers of the Norse saga. What I mean by that is that, as an example, for instance, we could look at the Longobard, which are a Germanic tribe that lived and conquered several territories in Italy between 568 and 774. Paul the Deacon speaks about these warriors and even tells us about a cynocephalous, monstrous warrior warriors that would allegedly join their ranks in combat. Cynocephalus meaning dog-headed. Is this another type of warriors that, according to the writer, eat the flesh of their enemies and drink their blood? Could there be a correlation between the Cynocephalus warriors of the Longobards, as described in the sources, and their connection with animal, skin, and the Berserkir of the Norse saga? Well, the reality is probably not, mostly because we do know that such warriors didn't exist. It was in fact a false rumor that was spread by the Longobards in order to instill fear in their enemies, to try and discourage them to meet them in combat. Another very interesting aspect when it comes to this is what was reported by Professor Michael Spiedel from the University of Hawaii, as he was the one who noted that in the Trajan column specifically, there is a type of warriors, possibly belonging to auxiliary troops, that we could probably identify with the Quadi people, who go into battle wearing bear skins and wolf skin, and they are in the iconography. Is there a correlation between these warriors that were fighting and are represented in the Trajan column and the actual Norse bear skins and wolf skin? Well, the only thing we can say is maybe, but we have no idea if this is in fact a proof of the presence of the concept of berserkers even with other Germanic people of the continent, or if it's just a coincidence. Still, the cool thing about this is that, considering the fact that these were auxilia, if there really was a correlation, then it would mean that the Romans had berserkers actually fight for them and with them, joining their ranks as auxiliary troops. It's a big statement, but it is really cool to think about. Now, regardless of how you want to call them, or regardless how you imagine them, one thing is for sure. As you read the sagas, you will notice that they are almost never indicated in a positive sense. In the sense that these are not heroes, these are usually crazy men that do horrible things like going around and challenging men for their wives or daughters and then killing them. But one thing that characterizes them is their power, which is usually given to them by Odin. In other words, the fact that these warriors would be invulnerable against iron and steel and fire. So, you try to burn them, you try to stab them, not gonna work. And this is thanks to Odin, at least from the perspective of the Norse, or from the Christian perspective, which we also get as we read monks telling us about the Berserkir, it's witchcraft. And there is this really cool passage that I wasn't aware of, but Dr. Crawford actually mentions in one of his videos, where a monk tells us that fire doesn't work against berserkers because of this witchcraft, but then again, if the fire is blessed in the name of Christ, then it does actually end up working against the berserkers. And that was, of course, the perspective of a medieval Christian that is telling us the Christian God is more powerful than the Norse God. Interestingly enough, which may be worth of note, the fact that oftentimes berserkers, when described in the sagas, are connected with number 12. When they arrive, they do so in a group of 12. Moreover, another characteristic of berserkers in the sagas is that they are oftentimes foreign, in the sense that if said saga was written in Norway, then berserkers tend to be from Sweden, and if the saga was written in Iceland, then they may be from Norway, and so on and so forth. Alright, noble ones, but I hope that you enjoyed this video on my opinions and interpretations when it comes to the berserkers, but let me know what you think in the comments below, and as always, thank you so much for watching, and remember, the Metatron has spread his wings. Goodbye. If you're enjoying this video so far, please take a moment to check out my Patreon page. With as little as a $5 support, you can help us ensure that we can continue to produce high quality and high researched content. And at the same time, you get access to polls, extra videos, unlisted streams, and much more. Thank you so much.